Today on the Lucky Orange Show, we're talking about AI the way marketers should be talking about it, not as a magic content machine, but as a way to run better experiments faster. Our guest today is Kristian Jönsson from Creative Force and Dreem.ai to walk through 3 rules for using AI to test faster, how to turn AI into an option generator, how to shorten your feedback loops, and how to actually capture the learning so that every test makes the next one smarter. Here's Kristian and his 3 rules for using AI to test faster. One of the things that we wanted to chat about was using AI to test faster. Of course, there's an element there to test effectively, not only more efficiently. So today we're going to talk about 3 rules for using AI to test faster. What's your first rule?
Yeah, the first rule I have relates to when you start planning a split test. And the rule is stop debating the perfect answer, generate the tasting menu. I don't know if you're aware of something called the chef mindset, Jønsson, but a chef at a restaurant, whenever they plan a new menu and present that for the leadership team, they don't start with a lot of abstract ideas. They actually prepare a lot of things that they can taste first. And based on that, they start discussing the menu. Now, in e-commerce and especially in content production, it has often been the other way around. And why is that? That's because producing content, especially visual content, has been time-consuming and expensive. What that means is that now with AI being available, instead of starting any meetings where you plan what should we test and so on, instead of starting them with ideas, you basically start with 5 visual concepts. So what we see now and what we think people should do is they should start a meeting with those, and they should talk from pixels, images, instead of abstract ideas.
Yeah, I love that. One question I have kind of in the middle of that is that sort of shifts the bottleneck then away from we don't have time to generate variants to, we need to prioritize them. We need to pick better variants because we can create 100 where we could previously create 3 or 4. How would you coach a team on picking which ideas they should actually make into a test?
Yeah, great question. I think the most important thing at this phase is that it doesn't have to be perfect. Basically, you are making a lot of concepts, a lot of briefs that you can then hand on to your creative team, or you can work more on it. The smart thing here, though, is that with AI, let's say you have an idea and you all align this is the right idea. You can easily explore more ideas. So if you go back to the visual side of things, you might have agreed that, let's say you're a luxury brand, you might have agreed this is the model and the lighting and setting and so on we need to use. But you might have different ideas on the setup, the background. So for instance, should it be a red background or a green background? Or if it's a picture you take outside, you might have an idea this would look great in the Scandinavia, but it might also look great in Japan. But before AI, you could not test that. You could not just go to Japan or to Scandinavia. So you couldn't do that. Now you can actually do it with AI and say, okay, let's try to add some more Scandinavian feel or add some more feel of what Tokyo looks like. And I think that's the big advantage here. So already in the planning phase, you can come a long way and make some really good briefs for a creative team.
Yeah, I love that. I would also love to work for a brand that has budget to fly me to Scandinavia and Japan for the same product, but maybe down the road I'll hit that. All right, Kristian, what's your second rule?
So the second rule relates to when you're actually producing these visuals. And the rule is kill the waiting room, start testing even before the product arrives. So what many e-commerce brands do today is that they wait for the product to arrive. It arrives in the warehouse. They have to ship it to a studio or somewhere to actually create the content. Then they have to create the content. Then they have to do some retouching after. And only then they get it live. You see how that process can be very, very long. What you can do now with AI is you can even ask your vendor, provide me some images of this product. Take some images that I can use. And you can start working on your creatives, all the things you want on your website and want to test already before the truck has arrived at the warehouse. This way, you can even put something live. You can start building waitlists. You can start building hype for your product because you only need one simple vendor-provided image, and you can turn it into all kind of things. And I think this really changes momentum and the way you should treat your testing pipeline. So now you should basically start testing, in my opinion, start testing a lot of things before your product is ready to be shipped. That way, when you really, when it's ready and you really need to get those out of the door, you already have some results. You already did some experiments. You tested a few things. And that is the big change that AI enables here.
I think there might be teams that get slightly uncomfortable with that rule because they say, what happens if we have what happens if we have a delay? What happens if the product that we receive looks different than what we thought it would be, or the ultimate form that we got was different than, the initial template that was being worked on? I imagine then there's a sub rule here that says don't do this too early in the product development process. Like, only once this thing is really locked in can you comfortably say, let's start building hype around it. Let's start building images around it. That this thing that we know we're going to get is really it. And so maybe for those who are just building relationships with vendors, or those who are just really getting started, proceed with caution on doing this until you know that you can trust the people who are building the product for you, that it's going to look like what you think it's going to look like.
Yeah, exactly. Like, do it with the final product, but do it before it ships. Get those images in place. Have that ready and start working on it.
Yeah, I love that.
The other thing...
Go ahead.
Yeah. The other thing this really opens up for is, I think the crazy thing with AI is that now you should see the edit as the shoot when we are in like fashion and in the photo studio, right? Because the cost of changing your mind is basically it's zero. So if you want to change the style, a model, or background, you can just do it. What this means, and where I'm trying to get to here with the waiting time and so on, is that this also opens up for reacting on stuff like trends. So when a trend happens on TikTok, instead of having to ship all the things to your studio or get new products and so on, you can actually change your photos on that day. So that's the other thing that's related to this rule about, killing the waiting room and start testing much earlier than you do today.
Right. And that's a great extension from the first rule, that we can create more variations to prioritize with, to play with the team. And we can do that before the thing is even in our hands. We can do that as early as possible to start playing around with it. I think that's a great 1-2 punch there. Kristian, what's your third rule?
So the third rule relates to when you're capturing your learnings of all of these things that we talked about in rule 1 and 2. And the rule is, don't hoard files, but hoard truths. I have worked with conversion optimization for a while. And what happens in many marketing teams when they do A/B tests and so on is that they collect some knowledge, but that knowledge is often captured in people's head or as a file. So basically, if it's captured in someone's head and they leave the company and replacement comes in, they can see, well, this version of the website or this image won over this image. And that's a great insight for one image, right? But what you should do is you should start collecting the actual the insight as, like, what is the rule that made this win? Because then if you collect that insight, and now I get to the point with AI, if you collect that insight, you can add that to your AI prompt library and continue iterating on your AI prompts that will provide better outputs. So basically what you're building when you do tests is not a library of images that won, where you might, let's say you join a company later on, you don't have the context. But instead, it's a library of insights that you put into use in your AI prompts that helps you generate the next iteration and so on. And that way you continuously run a cycle that makes you better and better.
When let's get as tactical as possible here. When somebody completes a test, what should they be writing down? I know that when I take notes on things that I feed back into AI, it is more okay with that workflow for it to be a little bit of stream of conscious to say, here's what we think happened. Here's all the context I have. In this rule, in this recommendation, when a test completes, what should a marketer write down to feed that engine?
Yeah. So I think the good example here is you might have two pictures of a model, and they both have a white dress. On one of them, you have like a base background, and another of them, you have a red background. If the one with the red background win, what you know then is that a picture with a high contrast actually won. So it's not the picture with the red background, it was the one with high contrast. And that's the type of insight you can add back to your next prompt and say, okay, now let's start working with high contrast. Let's not start working with red backgrounds, because that might just be working well with that one dress, but let's start working with high contrast images. That's the type of things you should be getting out of these tests and utilizing in your next tests.
And when it comes to maybe higher volume experimentation programs, people testing not only the background, but maybe a pairing of the background with a variation of a product description, or that plus the hook in the ad, these things can really, really expand so quickly that it becomes hard to figure out why something won. What's the guidance there? Because it does feel like AI can help us analyze test results at scale as long as those notes come together well. And you know, at the end of the day, we're not saying there's a perfect lever to pull to say make every test win, figure out the ultimate combination that sells 100% of the time. But where would you guide people to say, once you've hit that that situation where you are testing 3 or 4 different elements of the cycle at once, where do those notes go? How does this rule apply there?
Yeah, I would start by saying try to limit the amount of variations you test, but if you don't have a lot of traffic and so on, test it in a wider scale. Again, in e-commerce, that might mean make a change, but do it through an entire collection instead of just a single product. That way you know what actually made the change. So let's say you want to test quicker and want to test 3 or 4 things at once, and you do that on the same page. I think you need to, of course, still use the data, but you cannot get that full explanation from it. So instead, you should say, what we try now is to test making the purchase, like from click to purchase, make that very, very short, that journey. And that's the thesis. And we use 3-4 things to do that. Versus another version where we really explain the product. We really actually try to drag it out a bit, but gives a much better experience, less of a feeling of we just want you to go and pay. Now, if you test those theses with 3 or 4 elements, that's like more like high level what you're testing. And then you should be testing, of course, what's the impact on our revenue and what's the impact on our return rate in that scenario. My guess is you could test if the return rate would be much lower if you educated people more, but it might also impact your revenue a bit. That's
Right.
how I would run a test like that.
Right. This is a great set of rules, better outputs, better insights, 3 rules for using AI to test faster. Kristian, thank you so much for joining me today.
I was happy to be here. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Lucky Orange Show. Before we go, if you haven't tried Lucky Orange yet, head over to www.luckyorange.com for a free 7-day trial of our leading conversion rate optimization toolkit. What's in that toolkit? Well, let's start with session recordings and heat maps. With session recordings, you can watch a full playback of an entire visitor journey on your website. Everywhere they click, scroll, move, everything they do in your site, a full playback. So you can see what's getting in the way of conversions and what is getting people over that finish line to convert. With dynamic heat maps, you can see the average visitor behavior on a page. So you can see clicks, moves, and scrolls. You can see how far down the page the average visitor is scrolling. And if something is below that line, that means that more than 50% of visitors are not seeing that. Lucky Orange also offers tools like live chat, announcements, and surveys so that you can communicate with your website visitors in real time. So again, if you have not tried Lucky Orange, or if you're not a user yet, head over to luckyorange.com, check it out, 7-day free trial with no credit card required. If you're a Shopify store owner, head over to the Shopify App Store to download the Lucky Orange app to your store today, as well as BigCommerce, HubSpot, Square, and many more. Check us out, and happy optimizing.